I think we are ready for the jury.
May we approach?
Yes. I apologize for the delay, ladies and gentlemen. Meant to be back in here a few minutes ago. Mr. Carter, I would remind you, you are still under oath. Mr. Bull, you may continue.
Mr. Carter, when you left Casey's in Milo, Iowa, where did you go?
We went straight home.
Do you know what time you got home or you dropped Shirley off?
It was approximately 7:45.
What happened when Shirley got out of your truck?
She had her coffee, and she said, I think I'll finish my coffee before I do the chores. And I said, I would. And I said, I'll see you between 11 and 11:30.
Is that what time you thought you'd see her?
Yeah, yes, I did.
Bill, where do you park your semi at?
Well, at that time I was parking it at the Myers farm, which is a mile and a half south of Pleasantville.
And were you intending on going to Eddyville, Iowa that day?
Yes.
Your Honor, permission to approach, retrieve, and exhibit?
You may.
Your Honor, permission to use a blow-up of Exhibit 7?
You may.
Bill, I'm showing you a map that the jury has seen or was admitted earlier in a smaller form. Do you recognize what this is a map of?
Yes, I do.
What is it?
It's a map of Highway 92 over to 163. 163 takes you down to the exit to where you get off to go to Cargill at Eddyville.
Bill, is this in essence a map starting where your son Jason kept his semi to the Cargill plant in Eddyville?
Yes.
Okay. So, Bill, can you talk us through a little bit this drive?
Well, the junction of 92, S45, and Highway 5 is just about a half a mile north of where Jason's truck was sitting.
And that junction of south of Pleasantville, does it have a local name that locals call it?
Yeah, it's called Pleasantville Y.
Okay. And then, is there a distance of travel going into the city of Knoxville?
Yes.
And then does that highway bypass down the south side of Knoxville?
Yes, and it's 4-lane, all 4 lanes, so you can run 65.
And then do you drive this route until you hit the outskirts of Oskaloosa, Iowa?
Yes.
Now, between a portion of just past Knoxville, it does turn to 55, doesn't it?
Yes, it does.
And then when you get to just outside of Oskaloosa, it turns back to 65, doesn't
65, 4-lane.
it? Bill, have you driven this route before?
Hundreds and hundreds of times.
Does it matter if you're loaded or unloaded, how quick you can drive it?
Yes.
Why?
Well, if you're loaded, you have 80,000 pounds on, or close to it. And the hills slow you down. Whereas if you're empty, you're weighing somewhere around 27,000. And you don't have to worry. Hills don't slow you down. You can run as fast as you want. And legal speed limit is 55 on part of it and 65 on the other.
Now, Bill, if you're fully loaded and not in a hurry, how long does it take you to go from where you park your semi to Eddyville?
Well, just about almost an hour. 58, 59 minutes.
And Bill, on that morning, did you drop your wife off and then drive to where you parked your semi?
Yes,
And that's in fact north of the Pleasantville Y.
yes,
It's about, what would you guess, 2 miles or so further north than Jason's vehicle, where he parks his semi, or?
approximately, yes.
And then what happens when you get in your semi? What do you have to do?
I let it warm up, even in the summer months.
Why?
Well, you just don't want to jump in a diesel and take off. I let them warm up, let the oil get circulated and build up air pressure. And then once the air pressure gets up there to 140, 150, by then I'm ready to take off.
So you think you left your home around 7:45.
Yes,
Then you had to drive to where you parked your semi.
yes,
Then you had to let your semi warm up.
yes,
And then you had to then drive to Eddyville loaded.
correct.
And you got to Eddyville right around 9:01.
I did.
So did that trip that morning loaded take you about 55 minutes?
Yes, it did.
What about making that trip home unloaded? How long does it take you?
I have run it with a patrolman with me. And we run 5 mile an hour over the speed limit. And I have run it in 42 minutes.
Are you pushing it?
Not
Did-
really, not at 5 mile an hour over.
Now you mentioned before some hills and elevation. Is there on this trip any stoplights?
Yes, and it's not a stoplight, it's a stop sign in Oskaloosa.
So we have a stoplight for this
Yes.
entire trip.
That's correct.
Now, in addition to that, is there a stop sign at the Pleasantville Y?
Yes,
So we have a stop sign outside of Oskaloosa and a stop sign in Pleasantville.
right.
So if we're talking about your need to accelerate or decelerate, we're only talking about 2 times.
That's correct.
Are there any hairpin turns on this drive?
No,
Are there any hills that cause the engine in a semi to struggle?
not empty. Not at all.
If you're driving this route, other than the size of the vehicle, would your empty semi handle all that significantly different than my Dodge 1500 pickup?
Wouldn't be much different.
Did you go straight from Myers to Eddyville that day?
Yes,
Bill, you indicated that you got right on the scale, you pulled right on to the dump, you dumped right away. Were you surprised?
pleasantly surprised.
Why?
Well, I thought there'd be a lineup of some kind. That doesn't happen very often where you can pull right on the dump and unload.
Bill, at that moment, did you make a decision about what was going to be different that morning for you?
Yeah, things had went so well, I decided to go back what we call the long way and take Highway 5, and I wanted to get me a coffee and a donut at Casey's in La Villa.
Did you have any other reason for stopping at Casey's in La Villa?
No.
Did you need to use the restroom?
Yes, I did. Yeah.
Your Honor, may I approach?
Okay.
Bill, I'm handing you a copy of a receipt that's identified as Exhibit 33. Does that receipt show that you purchased a coffee and a donut at 9:54 a.m. on June 19, 2015 at the La Villa Casey's?
Yes, it does.
State offers 33.
No objection.
Exhibit 33 is admitted.
So, Bill, I want to just look for a moment, if we can, at a couple exhibits. Bill, the jury has seen this, and it's 142A for the record, this overview of the Cargill plant. Are you familiar with this photograph, Bill?
Yes.
Is this where you go to drop corn?
Yes, it is.
Now, we've heard there's an east gate that takes you right out and right on your way back home.
Yes.
Is that the gate you went out?
No.
Did you go out the far gate that requires you to make a long loop, go all the way down and around?
Yes.
Why did you do that?
Because I wanted to get to Highway 5. And that's much closer to go to Highway 5 that way. And I wanted to stop and get coffee and a donut.
So, although our map, we're back on the blow up, Your Honor, from earlier. If you're down here, are you coming out and going on 137 and then hooking up with 5 down here?
Yes.
And then that takes you up to La Villa?
Yes.
Is that the long way?
Yeah. Yes, it is.
Bill, once you leave La Villa, it's Casey's, where do you go next?
I got back on Highway 5 and drove back to Knoxville. 5 hits 92 on the southeast edge of Knoxville. And I get on 92 and I go back to the junction, take the Highway 5 north to the Myers place, and then back in.
Bill, what was your purpose of backing in that morning?
Well, I decided to reload. Everything had went so well that I decided to reload the semi and have it ready for the next day. And I backed it in and gassed the truck auger up and started, untarped the semi, and then I started to load and loaded the semi.
Bill, is there anything about backing up your semi that's problematic at the Myers farm?
Yes, it was difficult to back in there. There was an old garage that was in the way. You have to back in and make 2 sharp cuts to get it in between the dairy barn and the grain bins. And it's difficult, but I've done it so many times I got used to it.
Now, you mentioned truck auger and gassing it up. For those of us who may not have a farming background, how would you describe this to us?
Truck auger is a 27-foot auger that is 8 inches in diameter, and it has a gas motor on it. And you start it first, and you tighten the belts and get it running, and then you start the 10-inch auger that comes out of the bin. And the 10-inch auger will overflow the 8-inch auger. It's larger, so you have to adjust the gate on it so that you've got your 8-inch auger running full, but not running over the basket, over the top of the basket.
Bill, how long does it take you approximately to back in, start both augers, put the fuel in, refill your semi, shut everything off, and retarp your semi?
45 to 50 minutes.
Bill, can you just turn it on and leave it?
No.
Why not?
Well, in a few minutes, by 10, 12 minutes, it'll be overflowing. You have to move the semi ahead as it fills. And if you left it set in one place, you're going to have corn all over on the ground. So you move it ahead so it doesn't hit the bows. The bows are what holds the tarp up. You move it ahead, and then you do that about 6 times, and you're loaded.
So what are you doing during this time?
Watching it, standing up on the front end of the trailer and watching it to where when it fills up a nice mound in between the bows, I move it.
Bill, after you got done unloading, or excuse me, loading your semi, where did you go next?
I tarped it over, shut everything down, gassed the truck auger back up, and then I got in my pickup and I headed for home.
Did you go straight home?
No, I wanted to go by the Shadle Farm. That's 120 acres that we own about 3 miles north of where the home place is. Because Jason had sprayed it 2 days before, and I wanted to see if the weeds were wilting, if they were dying. And I went by the house, and I got a phone call from my daughter.
What did you learn in that phone call?
She said, Dad, Mom's dead. And Jason found her and he won't call 911. You've got to call 911. And I did. And then I took off for home as fast as I could get there.
Bill, when you got, how far do you think it was between when you got that 911 call and when you got to your home?
How far?
Yeah.
It's about 3.5 miles, so to home from there.
When you got to your driveway, was your wife's truck in the driveway?
Yes,
Does your property have burn barrels on it?
yes,
Were the burn barrels burning?
yes.
Where was Jason?
Jason was on the deck talking on the phone. I didn't even stop. I just went running in the house.
What did you see?
I found Shirley on the floor. And she was just looked like she was sleeping. Her eyes were closed. Her hands were crossed. And her legs were crossed.
What did you do?
Jason came in. And I said, Jason, look how she's laying. You don't die that way. And then he said, Dad, go downstairs. See if a gun went off.
And did you?
I had to picture her. The first thing I did was check her carotid artery. And she was dead. And then I picked her head up and I kissed her on the forehead. And she was cold. Then he came in and said, Dad, go downstairs. And I started down the stairway and I said, I never had any guns loaded. I never had any guns loaded. And I went back up and I picked her head up and I held her. There was a small pool of blood along her left side. It wasn't drying. It was liquid.
How do you know that, Bill?
I could tell. I stayed out of it while I held her head.
Bill, did Jason say anything else to you at this time?
He started pointing out bullet holes. He pointed out one in the refrigerator and one in the floor.
How did he point them out?
He just said, Dad, look at that bullet hole in the refrigerator, and then there was a bad gouge in the floor. And he said he was standing in the doorway between the kitchen and the office, and he said, some son of a bitch has robbed you and they've killed Mom.
Did he ask you to check anything else?
He had me look at my office, and it was a mess. Just a mess. Dumped all over on the floor.
At some point, did you go check for your pistol?
I went and checked I kept a revolver in the closet, but it wasn't loaded. But it was there. It was there in the closet, in our bedroom.
Then where did you go?
I went back to Shirley, and I held her. And then Kurt Seddon came in. He was a fireman. And he said, you got to come out with me, Bill.
Did you leave?
Yeah.
Now, you told this jury Shirley felt cold.
Yes.
Did she feel cold to you?
When I kissed her on the forehead, she felt cold.
Bill, did your wife feel different that day than any other day in the 52 years you were married to her?
Yes. Yes.
But as it relates to your marriage, those 52 years, had you ever spent a night apart?
Yes, once when I went skiing in Colorado. Once.
One time in 52 years?
Yes. It's the only time.
Bill, when she was on the floor, where was she in relation to the air conditioning vent?
Her feet were almost right next to it. It was blowing right on her lower legs and her feet.
When Mr. Seddon, Kurt, told you you needed to leave, what did you do?
He took me out by the big tree. And I just stood there, and then he and Jason talked for a little bit on the deck. And,
What did you do?
well, the ambulance went by and missed us, and they came back, but before they even got back, I think Deputy Lane was there. I'm not sure, but I walked down to the hog confinement to see if Shirley had done chores.
Okay, so I want to take a step back for a minute. You told the jury you were out of the hog business. Why do you have hogs at your property?
We kept my grandson's pigs there, his 4-H pigs there. We had a good building yet, and facilities, and they didn't have any at their place, so we always kept his pigs there, and he would come out on weekends and work with them, and that's why we had pigs down there.
What's your grandson's name?
Chase.
Chase, a good showman?
The best. He won junior showman and senior showman the same year. I was proud of him.
How many hogs did he keep at your property?
6.
What were they?
They were a combination of barrows and gilts.
Bill, stop for a second. What's a barrow?
A barrow is a castrated boar.
What's a gilt?
A gilt is a female that has not had babies yet.
Is there special food you feed a 4-H hog?
Yes, I made up a recipe, and we like to make a gruel out of the feed, so they eat it better. And we wanted to make sure they were big enough for county fair time.
What's a gruel?
A gruel is when I mix up the feed in a 5-gallon bucket, and then you mix water in with it till it has like an oatmeal consistency, and they really like it. They eat it better than if it's a dry feed.
Bill, between you and Shirley, who took better care of the hogs?
Shirley. She just, well, I'd go down there and feed them, and I always mix the feed, but she'd go down there and she would put out new bedding, and she would rake it smooth. I mean, it was always smooth. And I was always in a hurry, so I didn't do as good a job, but I fed them well.
Were there concerns about making weight or being too heavy as it relates to these hogs?
Yes, we were afraid the barrows might be too heavy. We had had one the year before, a gilt that weighed 330 some pounds, and 300 was the limit. So we wanted to make sure that that didn't happen again. So we weren't feeding the barrows as much as we were the gilts, and we were pushing the gilts.
Had the gilts been sick?
Yes, one of them especially had been sick.
Was it eating as well as the other?
It was by then, yes.
Now, are pigs grazers, or do they eat when the food gets put out?
They eat when the food gets put out. Yeah.
So do they dilly-dally?
No. They come right to the trough, and in the mornings, like that morning, Shirley would do the mixing of the water and make the gruel. And then she would pour it into their troughs, and they would go right after it. But it still took about 35 to 40 minutes from the time they started to eat to when it was all cleaned up.
Is that primarily true for your gilts?
Primarily true for the gilts, because the barrows would eat quicker.
Bill, when you went down to look that morning, could you tell Shirley had done the chores?
Yes, she had done them.
What led you to believe Shirley had done the chores?
Well, the gilts were still eating. They were still eating. So I knew she'd fed them, but not that long ago.
Now, was there anything about the bedding that stood out to you?
The bedding was perfect. It was smooth. They hadn't run back into it or played around in it. There was no defecation. She'd cleaned the pins out good. There was no defecation. It was just immaculate, and they were still eating, still nosing around.
Now, Bill, do you agree with the statement that pigs don't tend to go to the bathroom where they sleep,
That's right.
and they don't tend to go to the bathroom where they eat?
That's right.
So if we were to look at a photo, where would it be that if the pigs had gone to the bathroom, they would have gone to the bathroom at?
In the cement area between where they eat, and we had a 2x6 that held the sawdust back where they slept. So they would urinate and defecate in that cement area in between.
Bill, you indicated you felt like Shirley had done the chores.
Yes.
Do you feel like something interrupted Shirley completing the chores?
I do.
What leads you to that conclusion?
When she got done, when Shirley was done, she would rinse the 5-gallon buckets out, rinse them good. And so flies wouldn't gather. And then she would turn them upside down in the feed room. Well, they were upside down, but they were out on the cement slab. And she didn't get them back in the feed room. And that was unlike her. And the hose that she used to make the feed and then to wash the buckets out was still strung out across the grass there and hooked onto the hydrant, and she always coiled that up. She was very neat about it, and she would coil it up. And it was still stretched out, so I thought something had interrupted her.
Bill, did Shirley usually have lunch ready? Would she make lunch for Jason and you?
Oh, not very often, but she did some.
If Jason, in your experience, based on her behavior and habits, if Jason would have shown up, would she have gone up to see if there was something she could do to help him?
Yeah, she would have.
Bill, after you looked at the condition of the farm, whether or not chores were done. Actually, let me ask you one other question, Bill. Isn't it true if you just walked down to the pigs, the mere fact that you walked down there would cause them to think to get up because they're going to be able to eat more, right?
Well,
Your Honor, at this point, I would just object to leading. I think this,
I think it was leading, I'm not sure. You may answer, sir.
it doesn't necessarily mean that's true, Ed. Because if they've just eaten and they're laying down, and it's a warm day, they're not going to jump up. But you're right, towards the evening, around feeding time, if just somebody walking down there, that would make them jump up and think they were going to get fed.
Did what you saw lead you to believe they had just jumped up and walked towards you because you showed up?
No,
Why not?
because the gilts were still eating, and they hadn't even tracked up the sawdust. They hadn't made one hoof print in it.
Bill, you indicated to the jury that you saw the buckets turned upside down.
Yes.
If we wanted to look at the photograph, how would we know, since they're not our buckets, that they're upside down?
The pail, that you picked the bucket up with would be down on the floor, and those buckets had American flags on them, and the flag would be up towards the top.
Bill, as you walked back up to the home, let me ask you this, after you checked on the hogs, did you go anywhere else on your property?
No.
Where did you go to?
I walked back up where the group was gathering.
And had Deputy Lane arrived by this time?
Yes.
Bill, have you had an opportunity to review the photographs that were taken by law enforcement on that day?
Yeah, some, I think.
As it relates to Shirley's chore boots, is there something as someone who lived with Shirley for 52 years stands out to you?
Yes.
What is that?
She always took her chore boots off on the steps of the deck. Unless it was going to rain or raining. Then she would put them in the garage. But otherwise, she took them off and left them sit on the bottom. There's 3 steps that come up on the deck, and she'd leave them on the bottom step. That's where she left them, unless it was going to rain.
Bill, can you describe to us what's happening over the next hour or so?
Well, I noticed Shirley's jersey gloves. She always wore jersey gloves, and she always put them back on the top step of the basement stairway, and they weren't there. They were gone. I noticed that when I was in the house. I didn't go back in the house after Kurt had me come out. And then
Bill, let me interrupt you for a moment, if I may. Why did she wear jersey gloves?
she didn't want to get the hog smell on her hands. She cleaned out the manure and stuff with a scoop shovel, and she always wore jersey gloves, so she could keep the smell off of her hands.
At the time, did you realize that as you were running around trying to make sense of what happened? Or is that something that came to you later?
No, I noticed the jersey gloves were gone when Jason had me go down the stairway, and I came back up. I noticed they were gone. So I assumed they were outside with her boots or something, but they weren't.
At some point, did a person you known as Brad Kaufman show up on the scene?
Yes.
Did you know Brad Kaufman?
Yes, I knew him well.
Did you observe your son and Brad Kaufman having a conversation?
Yes,
Could you hear that conversation?
I could.
Are you specific about what they were talking about?
Jason had told Brad, and I overheard it. Maybe he wanted me to hear it. That he had started the tractor to circulate the chemicals that was in the sprayer, and that he had greased the sprayer.
As a result of that, at some point that day, did law enforcement take you to go look at the sprayer?
Yes.
Bill, were the zerts greased?
No.
Was the tractor still running?
No.
Before we go any further, I want to talk a little bit about things of value that existed in your home on June 19th, 2015. Did you and Shirley take prescription medication?
Yes.
Did you have checks in your home?
Yes.
Did you have firearms in your home?
Yes.
Did Shirley keep her purse in the home?
Yes.
Where would her purse traditionally be?
Hanging on McKenna's high chair, our granddaughter's high chair.
And where was her high chair kept?
Right by the dining room table.
Shirley owned jewelry?
Yes.
Had you purchased jewelry for her?
Yes.
Was she a flashy individual that wore a lot of jewelry?
No.
Where was her jewelry kept at?
Kept in 2 jewelry boxes on top of that dresser that was in our bedroom.
Bill, was anything broken in your home?
No.
Was your TV missing?
No.
Were any tools missing?
No.
Other than a .270 bolt-action rifle, were any of your firearms missing?
No.
Were the screens popped off your windows?
No.
Were there any broken or open windows?
No.
Did it look like anyone had damaged your front door?
No.
Your back door?
No.
Bill, was there any water on the floor in your kitchen?
No.
Was Shirley's body wet at all?
No.
Bill, at some point later on in the early afternoon, did Jana and Billy come to your home?
Yes.
At some point, did you, Jason, and Billy walk away from the group?
We may have.
Do you recall your son, Jason, saying anything that seemed odd to you?
He said to Billy, you know, he'd had to rack another round in.
Did that make a whole lot of sense to you at the time?
No, it didn't.
Bill, how would you explain your emotional state on June 19, 2015?
It was a mess. It was terrible. They say your life can change in an instant. It did. It changed. And it'll never be the same.
Were you sad?
Broken-hearted.
Were you angry?
I was angry.
Bill, on June 19th and on days after June 19th, did you make comments that your wife's body was cold and stiff?
On the 19th, I did. I was arguing. I had just heard that the local media had said for people not to worry. They didn't have to lock their doors or anything. And so that told me that it was somebody in my family. And that made me mad, angry. And I was telling you and the sheriff and Mike Motzinger, who was head of DCI at that time, I said, I have a good family. I said, this didn't happen within my family. And I did say something about she was cold and stiff. Jason had said she was cold and stiff. And, but I was angry, and I was taking it out on them. I just couldn't believe that we had a meth lab that was south of us about 3 years before. and the boys that were running it took off in the timber. And we all got phone calls to lock our doors and be on the lookout. And then my wife's laying there dead, and they say, don't worry about it. And it did make me angry.
Bill, how many times did you pick up your wife's neck, head, shoulder area on June 19th, 2015?
3 times. 3 times.
Did you have to lift her entire body up to get her
No.
head to come up?
I just picked her head up. I put this arm under, and I picked her head up.
Did her neck move?
Her head moved, yes, her neck. Her shoulders didn't come off the floor.
Did you have to use an incredible amount of effort to pull her body and neck and head up?
No. No.
Bill, this jury's also heard a comment where you said something to the effect of, I was a butcher. I know rigor mortis.
I did say that. I was mad, and I was a butcher when I was young. But rigor mortis, I don't know anything about that.
How long has it been since you've been a butcher?
I was 17 years old when I learned to be a butcher, and I butchered for about 2 years. But I was just mainly angry.
Bill, could you tell your wife was stiff on June 19, 2015?
No. Even when I touched her neck to check the carotid artery, I mean, she was cool and cold. Her forehead was cold. But I didn't really notice any stiffness. I was more concerned about the blood. I didn't want to get in it. And it was liquid.
Bill, where did you go, if anywhere, after leaving your home, 132 Perry Street?
Well, we went up to the community center at Pleasantville. They had us all go up there. And that's where the family gathered and friends came up. And then that's where they started questioning.
Bill, generally speaking, were you angry about the speed of the investigation? Did you perceive things weren't getting done as quickly as you'd like?
I was upset that my clothes weren't taken.
Okay.
I was upset that my clothes weren't taken and Jason's clothes weren't taken, because by then it was pretty obvious to me that there was just 2 people that they were interested in, unless it was Mike McDonald but they were interested in family. And so I forget the question, Ed.
Okay, fair enough. I'll ask a different one. Were you allowed to go back into your home that Friday night?
No.
When you left your home, did you take clothes with you?
No. Just the clothes that I had on.
Was your phone, cellular phone, left on the counter at 132 Perry Street when you
Yes.
came into the home?
Yes.
Your Honor, I'm about to transition to a new topic. Would this be a good place to take our break?
I think it might be. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take our noon recess. We're going to be at recess until 1:15 this afternoon. Please remember the admonition I have previously given to you. Keep an open mind. Do not discuss the case among yourselves or with anyone. Don't allow yourself to be exposed to any media reports related to this case. We will see you back about 1:15.